On the 30th of April, coinciding with Walpurgisnacht 2026, Studio Shaft dropped the third trailer for the upcoming Walpurgisnacht Rising film, not only doubling down on the August 28 release date, which appears to be set in stone, but also showing off a lot of new scenes. Welcome back to the Madoka Magica channel, folks. Today we're going to be covering the 30-second teaser to dissect all of the new info we can, revisit some old theories, and even make some new big predictions for this ever-evolving project. Let's not waste any time. The trailer begins with Madoka and Homura together in an area which I believe is the path we see the girls all take to go to their school. The Homura here is the one with purple hair and one of the ones that we suspect to be a Chlorodol. The scene itself calls back to a similar scene we saw in the Side Homura trailer from about a year ago, where Homura had her bottom lip pulled down to reveal weirdly well illustrated teeth. This is of course being done to Madoka by the dummy Homura here. Additionally, the dummy Homura looks as though she may be crying, but she does have a smile on her face. She is also above Madoka in this scene. As you can see, the dummy Homura's lip line is parallel to Madoka's nose. Madoka may be crouching or kneeling, or dummy Homura could be elevated in some way. The next scene is, well, it's Sayaka's hand being pushed into a wall while it's firmly entwined with Homura's. It's really oddly, man, what's a way I can word this without sounding weird? It's very tense, I think. The way Homura's hand grips Sayaka's is something I'd expect to see in a scene where, well, for lack of any better comparison, where the next scene would be followed by a very romantic gesture like a kiss. Love and romance actually seems to be a relevant theme in this trailer, so I may be onto something with this observation. I'm just so curious as to what the context is for this scene. As a Homura and Sayaka shipper, this scene is simultaneously great, but also really very confusing. In any case, the alleyway they seem to be in is very dark and has some wires, and it seems to be reminiscent of similar locales that we have seen before. Moving on, we get a look at the garden or pond-like area associated with the girl with green hair, who we now know is named Choka or Choka Shi. In the scene, we see Choka and, surprisingly, Kyoko sitting together at a table with sweets and tea. So this calls to mind the visual of Homura and Kyoko's talk in the Rebellion story. Even the framing here is very similar. We will get to the discussion of the new pairings in this trailer soon enough because I have a lot to say about them, but we'll just brush over that for now and continue with the analysis. Next up, we see Nagisa running through a hall with creatures that I think are probably witch familiars that are designed to look like maids. The hallway itself is inside of the cafe-like domain that we are associating with the girl with orange hair, whose name we now know is Selma Therese. Speaking of Selma, we cut to her next and see her in a dimmed location that has drawstrings on either side of her, akin to maybe a stage curtain waiting to be raised. Selma is depicted in dramatic dark lighting and clearly appears antagonistic in this shot. A shot of Choka is given next, and it's a close-up on her face as a flash of light comes in from off-screen. We next get a shot of a character who I believe is Madoka, but it's possible that I'm mistaken here. Visually, there are some similarities between this character and the mystery character with beige hair from the first trailer, but I will further go into my thoughts on her soon. Rain is drenching this girl's clothes and hair, and she appears to be standing atop a very tall building. Like I said, I'll share more thoughts on this later, but I will for now say that this seems to be connected to the scene from the original release trailer that had Madoka falling from a building. Following this scene, we see photorealistic hands holding handfuls of red particles, which I believe are probably rose petals, and in the middle of them is a sleeping cradled figure, which is probably the same character who was standing atop the building. We then cut to the interior of a building, and I think this may be Homura in the middle. The building is illuminated with red lighting, and it gradually gets darker until it crossfades with the logo of the new company handling the distribution rights for the film, a company by the name of Animec. Right after the logos, we get to see a new look of the gown-wearing Homura who uses the rotary telephone. She appears to be laying on her back using the aforementioned phone and also has a slightly updated design. To me, it actually appears reminiscent of the character designs from Revolutionary Girl Utena, which may in fact be what they're calling back to given the rose headband and the fact that the rebellion story itself is a giant love letter to the Utena series. And speaking of Utena, the following scenes appear to be homages to imagery from that series, specifically the use of shadows in certain scenes and promotional art. Shout out to Nora Vanguard who pointed this out to me in our live reaction to the trailer. First, we see Kyoko and Choka sitting back to back on a pedestal of some kind with an orange background that has a blue cross. Following this, we see Nagisa and Selma facing each other as they possibly hold hands while the background appears more brown with yellow squiggly lines on either side of the two girls. Both scenes depict the characters fully silhouetted and surrounded by bars excluding a window through which we can view them, and a spotlight in the shape of a heart illuminates the background behind their silhouettes. Following this is a close-up of a statue whose eyes are these weird blue gems. Tumblr user Delta Ruiner pointed out a possible design similarity to that of a Mayan calendar, which you can read more about in the link down below. That scene match cuts with a close-up of some kind of monster or perhaps a familiar that resembles a cat. Upon closer inspection, it's highly likely that this is meant to be the same cat-made monster thing that we saw earlier in the scene with Nagisa. Following this, we have several shots of someone fighting what I think can be inferred to be Wraiths. They look to be updated designs and have something to do with Madoka as her left eye is seen overlaid with the faces of them several times. The area they are in appears to have posters or just photos in general that are heavily referencing Homura. You can see lizard imagery everywhere here. We see the rooftop of a building which then explodes as a large black structure emerges from inside, sending glass and a red liquid which may be blood everywhere. We see some kind of energy beam, arrow, whatever it is. It's being used to attack something. Based on the color of the background, I think it's safe to assume this is connected to the prior scene of the Wraith fight. Furthermore, we see what could be the aftermath of the Wraith fight as slips of paper fly through the air, while you can see statued hands in the background. Some quick research tells me that the calligraphy on this paper reads to roughly mean demon woman, so the logical guess is that this is referring to Akama Homura, but please take this with a grain of salt, I don't know for sure. I will update the description with an addendum if this is wrong. We next see Sayaka in the middle of a fight with someone, and she's fighting in a location that appears reminiscent of the large hilled road from the Rebellion story where we had a close-up of the moon behind Kyoko and Homura. Similarly, you can see the half-moon in the background of this shot. We see yet another shot of a wraith, but curiously this one's hand turns green in a way that reminds me of the imagery depicted alongside Ruma Surano or possibly even the Uwasa of the anonymous AI from Magia Record. It's not a perfect match, but it does bear a resemblance potentially worth pointing out. Additionally, I want to point out that we see these parade banners in the background, which brings to mind both Walpurgisnacht and the Law of Cycles, whose entrances were parades that have these similar types of banners decorating them. We next see a couple of new scenes of Selma and Choka, and we get a glimpse at their voices for the first time too. Choka is voiced by Shion Wakayama, and Selma is voiced by Tomoyo Kurosawa. I believe Selma is saying Anata no Kage, while Choka is saying Anata sore kieba, which appears to be a back and forth about someone's darkness or shadow. We then see Madoka as feathers swirl around her, and I believe that it's also Madoka talking in this section, but I might be wrong, so please bear with me. I'm not as familiar with the JP voice cast as I am with the English voice cast. In any case, whoever it is speaking says what I think is Ano Hito no Yami, which is further adding to the talk about darkness from Selma and Choka. We get what I think is probably a reanimated shot of Mami from the first trailer which introduced the character redesigns, but this specific shot also actually appears reminiscent of the so-called God of Justice shot from the concept movie trailer. Following that is a close-up of Sayaka in presumably the same place. Based on her expression here and the lighting in the bottom left looking kind of yellow, I wonder if Sayaka and Mami are fighting each other for some reason. And then we get to the pair of scenes which honestly kind of blindsided me at first, but upon some further thinking, I'm actually not too surprised by these. First of all, we are in the same bar location we saw from, I believe, trailer number 2, which was shown various times to have all of the girls in it except for Madoka at seemingly different points in time. In this case, we see Choka and Kyoko sitting on some chairs seated back to back, similar to the silhouette scene from before. In the previous trailer, the group of chairs Kyoko was sitting on were green, while this time they are purple. It could just be a lighting or color change, but the spatial positioning is also different, as right alongside Kyoko's sets of chairs previously was a row of red ones, which are now absent here. And then next to that are Nagisa and Selma dancing together on the pole we previously saw only Nagisa using. There's no major difference here, but the direction they are facing tells me that they are dancing not for whoever's spectating on the sides of the platform, but whoever is at the bar on the other end. The last time we saw this scene, it looked as though it was Sayaka sitting alone at the bar. Next is this gorgeous shot of Akuma Homura rising as that same red liquid we keep seeing elsewhere rains down around her. It could be linked to the earlier building explosion scene, and it also appears as though it could be linked to the scene from the side Homura teaser where the lizard runs into her, creating her demon wings. After the logo, we see Homura, the purple-haired dummy Homura, grabbing her parasol and opening it for a top-down view, and wow. It sure looks a lot like Walpurgisnacht when viewed from above, huh? We'll have plenty to say on this later, but there's a couple more scenes left here. Next, we see a hand taking a hold of a crystalline tomato of some kind and crush it until it explodes. This appears to be linked to a scene from an earlier trailer where we see Kyoko wiping or licking red residue from her hands, but we do not see the identity of the person here in this most recent trailer. We see this rotating fan that we've seen several times before that has an eye on it, and said eye is now half lidded while the color has shifted from what I believe was blue to red. And the final shot of the trailer shows the purple-haired Homura with her face replaced by an image of a galaxy superimposed with the August 28th release date. Well, we have lots to talk about because there's just so much new content, so I really don't want to waste any time here and just jump into the stuff that stood out the most to me personally. Moreover, we won't be trying to form any grand unified plot theory, I don't think, because I just don't feel I can really do that with too much accuracy. So yeah, what I'll instead be doing is just talking about a number of observations and thoughts I've had since watching the trailer and presenting them for discussion. Whether each observation I make is interchangeable with each other remains to be seen, but in any case, let's begin. I want to first talk about the delay situation, as I know this has caused some complaints and worries within the fandom. In this trailer, we get the name of a new company called Animac. Animac is an anime film distribution company made as a collaboration between Aniplex and Kadokawa. This was announced on March 2nd of this year. Now, the job of a distribution company is, of course, to promote the film and handle sales. We don't know when this happened for Walpurgisnacht Rising, but based on what I remember from covering this film over the years, August 28th is the first time we've had an actual release date given. There may have been one other instance of a release date some time ago, but for the most part, it's just been given to us in release windows for like months or seasons. It appears that part of the reason for the delays to the film was caused by a change in distributors. Now that we have a distribution company attached to the film and an actual solid release date alongside that, I feel very confident that the delays are done. Additionally, I think the film honestly looks way better in this trailer, which of course means there's been a lot of post-production touch-ups and most certainly some instances of reanimating some scenes. It's been a long journey on the wait for this film, but I think we should be confident in this release date moving forward. On the topic of animation and staff, by the way, there's a new name I noticed in the staff list which I want to spotlight, being Tomohiro Furukawa. Mr. Furukawa is an incredible name to get for a project like this. If you guys don't know, then he is responsible for animation work on a variety of projects, like a couple of one-off episodes of Death Note, Bleach, and Durara, to working on the openings for another and even Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. What is most relevant here is that he's a storyboard artist for this film, and looking at prior storyboarding work, Furukawa brings some serious muscle. He did an episode of Blue Lock, the third ending of Kokoro Connect, an episode of Stone Ocean, Sailor Moon Crystal, Shinkalion, just to name a few. The point is, Furukawa is the GOAT, and we can already see a lot of improvements in how things look in this film when comparing the newest material to the first trailers. I can't wait to see what he can do with Madoka Magica, and to be honest, I really hope the work on storyboarding and animation is why the delays happened, because it just means that in the end, we're going to get an incredible looking film. Okay, corpo shilling out of the way, let's actually discuss what's going on in this trailer. So a quick addendum is needed for some previous analysis, and I have to shout out Karma's anime analysis for being the reason I even finally realized this, but yes, Wraiths are in fact back in this film, and it even looks like we have an updated appearance for them. I have to admit, I had not properly read the Wraith Arc manga, mostly because I just wasn't interested in Wraiths as a concept, but I realize now how silly that was, and in terms of accurate and objective analysis, that decision has come back to bite me in the butt. Well, I reckon the best place to start to fix that would be with a quick refresher on what exactly these things are. In the new universe made by Monokami, Wraiths are the replacement for witches as the entity that manifests from the world's collective negative emotions. There are several kinds of wraiths, but they are all mostly identifiable by their statue-like appearances, though they can change depending on the form. The fact that they persist and are seen in these trailers I think helps to clarify some misinformation I have unintentionally helped to spread, which is that Homura made a new world at the end of the Rebellion story. Based entirely off of the visuals, I believed it was as simple as that. Homura is doing what Madoka did in the original show. But to be honest, I think it now just makes far more sense that what happened is Homura's labyrinth grew to encompass the entire universe. To be fair, we don't know for sure which outcome is true, but it's certainly not as clear-cut as I was presenting it prior. So essentially, per this reading, we have a parallel world that is mirroring the actual universe and is possibly colliding with the real world, and it's from that real world where we see the intruders come in, including the Wraiths. Now, we all need to admit when we're wrong or misinformed, and this is one of those times. I've seen this theory floating around for quite a while, but because it didn't make any sense to me personally at the time I read it, I decided to ignore it. Honestly, as an analyst and a reviewer of a series like this, it's a serious blow to my prior videos, and I'd like to apologize for not always putting in the full level of analysis that I could have been. Now armed with this new information, some things from the older trailers start to make a lot more sense. In the past two trailers, Homura refers to the new magical girls Selma and Choka as ones that she doesn't know, and that tripped me up in my reviews. But given the nature of how the Nutcracker Witch's labyrinth worked, it totally makes sense now. The method of luring Homura employed in her labyrinth in the Rebellion story worked in a way such that only people Homura personally invited in would be allowed to enter. She obviously has never met Selma or Choka as far as we know, so them being girls she doesn't know makes sense if we are still inside of her labyrinth, as they would be intruders in a space where she wouldn't have even invited them. Speaking of invaders, this trailer makes it very clear that someone is not quite who they seem. In Karma's video predicting the plot for the next film, he brings up the idea of Doppel Homura being a main player in the film, obviously based on some things we've seen from the concept movie. Honestly, it's a really good analysis and a pretty interesting call for the plot, and while I don't 100% agree with the idea of who we're seeing being a Doppel, I'll still credit Karma's theory as being the basis of my own updated take on this so-called invader theory. Personally, I still think that the many different Homuras are in fact transformed versions of the Clara dolls, but there's another aspect to this where I find myself disagreeing with Karma as it pertains to the potential identity of another intruder in the labyrinth. First, we need to do a quick explainer on another type of wraith called the mutant wraith. These are a kind of wraith that adopt the appearance of a person whose memories and emotions they consume, which can also include magical girls. The Wraith arc features several of these wraith doppelgangers, and in fact, there is even one that's based on Madoka, which we'll get to soon. The mutant wraith's disguises work solely on people who are already familiar with the original person. For example, Homura becomes fixated on Wraith Madoka in the manga because of this. The mutant wraiths only appear as wraiths to anyone who didn't already know the original person. Now, you might think that this would be a ridiculously easy flaw to exploit, and under normal circumstances, sure, this wouldn't really be a massive issue. The problem is that we're dealing with a world dictated by Homer's ability to let people in only if she chooses them. Every person in the labyrinth should be ones that only Homer knows. Thus, a mutant wraith that's adopting any of their forms could easily sneak in and just not raise any alarm bells. There's no denying that wraiths are in this film, and I think for sure that we have already seen at least one mutant wraith. The question is, who is the doppelganger infiltrating this world? To that, I think the most likely answer must be Madoka Kaname herself, something I think Karma also brought up in his video, and if so, I'm obviously in agreement that a Wraith Madoka exists, just in a different way. There's this scene from one of the past trailers that shows Madoka looking at a phone being surrounded by 15 split versions of herself with their faces obscured save for the eyes. But, further on that, only the right eye remains untouched, while the left eye is duplicated and in some cases moved out of place on each of these 15 other versions of Madoka. In this recent trailer, when we see the new Wraith design, their faces are overlaid with multiple copies of Madoka's left eye. And this is the same for each individual Wraith that we see in the trailer. I believe the reason that Wraiths are even in this film is because they are attracted to and absorbing Madoka's negative emotions, replacing her and leaving behind an empty husk. Leaving behind someone who might even be pushed to a place of extreme despair, enough that they might take drastic measures. Let's go back to this shot of who I am positive is Madoka, which shows her standing atop a building in the rain. This obviously calls back to a scene from the original first trailer where we see Madoka falling from a building, but a detail I never pointed out back then is that Madoka's shoes are taken off and left behind when she jumps. In Japan, it's common for people who may be trying to take their life by jumping to remove their shoes before doing so, as a part of mental preparation and for cultural traditions and beliefs. We have already seen this imagery in the original show. In the ending credits for the second episode, we're shown that the office lady affected by Gertrude's witch's kiss left her shoes behind on the building when she tried to jump. So there's clearly an implication of suicide in this scene, and moreover, the person jumping either directly is or is designed to make us think of Madoka. Now, don't get me wrong, Madoka has every reason to be depressed throughout the series, but I wonder what has pushed her so far to take such a drastic next step. Now, I know I originally said that the girl with the beige hair may be a new character made by the Law of Cycles, but with the obvious inclusion of Wraiths in this film, I have to wonder how much of that idea still holds up. So, in the first trailer where we get the scene of the girl I'm sure is Madoka leaping from a building, we also see that there's this eruption below her, and from it emerges glitchy visuals that are synonymous with the Wraiths. In this newest trailer, we have a scene of some photorealistic hands cradling someone laying atop something red which may be rose petals, but based on the fact that this person being cradled has no shoes, I think this person is Madoka and that it's directly connected to the building jumping scene. If you notice closely though, her hair seems to have faded and it looks a little bit more like a dull grey or maybe even beige. Oh, also the hands have some glitchy effects surrounding them, which is just another reference to the Wraiths, and that tells me that these hands belong to a Wraith. Anyway, so what if that girl with the beige hair is actually Madoka after having her energy drained by a Wraith? Maybe even fusing with one? In the Wraith arc, the so-called Wraith Madoka is just a mutant Wraith who looks like Madoka because it stole her identity. But I wonder if there's a little bit more to it than just that. Like, what happens when a Wraith fuses with the person with which it's taking its form from? In fact, Cream-Held Faucet is literally already a similar type of fusion. It is a Wraith based on Homura and one that absorbed her time shield, fusing with Cream-Held Gretchen. So, with this in mind, Maybe it's possible for a wraith and a magical girl to fuse as well. But still, this doesn't answer our main question. What happened to drive Madoka to attempt to take her own life? Well, the answer to that lies in Homura's own actions. In the ending of the Rebellion story, Homura rips Madoka out of the law of cycles and forces her back into a normal life. What is Madoka's greatest insecurity? It's that she fears she has no purpose to offer the world outside of just existing. She downplays herself constantly because she feels that she's never doing enough. Now, pair this with the fact that Madoka has been forcibly taken out of the role that was giving her purpose, and I think a clear picture is starting to present itself. Of course, there's much to be said about whether Madoka's role truly is fulfilling, but from Madoka's perspective, it was the most fulfillment she would have ever known. And now, with no role to fill, Madoka returns to her mundane life that puts her in a position where she feels even more inadequate than ever before. While this is just a headcanon, I'm adding on that I feel like this lines up with the take I've had about the nature of Homura's wish. We know that in Homura's earlier time loops, Madoka was very outgoing, enough to the point that certain scenes in Episode 1 are completely reversed for the iconic Episode 10 montage. In Drama CD 1, Memories of You, this goes even further and we see even more of Madoka's personality in the first timeline, the one that serves as the origin for her wish to save Amy the cat. I have always believed that the wording of Homura's wish slowly made Madoka more and more dependent on Homura to fulfill what it was she actually wanted. Quote, instead of her protecting me, I want to be strong enough to protect her. As I said earlier, I believe the Wraiths are invading because they're drawn specifically to Madoka's depressive state. This could be why each Wraith, and not just one of them, have the overlapping imagery of one of her eyes. It's because they're feeding off of her depressive spiral. That detail with the eyes alone is why I'm so certain about this next point. I think we've also already seen Wraith Madoka. During my livestream covering the trailer, Nora of Vanguard brought up the idea that the scene at the very beginning of the new trailer could be Homura checking to see if the Madoka she's looking at is real. Now, obviously this scene calls back to the side Homura trailer. In that instance, we see a similar thing happening where someone is pulling on Homura's lip and it shows her teeth. At the time, we did not really have an easy way to interpret this, but I really like the reading as Nora presented it because it slots in pretty well with the Wraith's involvement. With some time to gather my thoughts, I don't think that that's what's going on in this scene, but I will still cover some observations we can make based on the idea. My take on what this is will be covered a little later. There are a number of ways to read this because the Homura pulling on Madoka's lip is one of the dummy versions, specifically the one who has red eyes and the parasol. So knowing this, why would a version of Homura who we already believe is, to an extent, fake, want to check out if someone else is fake? Well, looking at our options, and given that it's likely she's a Clara doll, what if the Madoka she's inspecting, so to speak, is a Wraith? To what extent the dolls recognize Madoka is unclear, but clearly this one is very familiar with her. Familiar enough, perhaps, to spot a possible discrepancy that would otherwise be pretty difficult to do so. I've been playing a bit coy because I do have an updated take on not just this scene, but the identity of this Homura too. So to not spoil what I'm going to talk about later, I will just go ahead and leave it here. I credit him a lot throughout this section, but the script of Karma's plot prediction is so incredibly dense, I just don't fully remember everything he originally presented. So it's possible I am misattributing certain predictions to myself as being original, so to cover my ass, I'll obviously be linking the video down below. Anything accidentally credited to myself is not intentional, I just have a very hard time remembering all of the minor details. Now, something I can claim as my own, and perhaps the most important question for me and my community, is whether or not my theory and analysis on the identity of the two new magical girls has survived with the release of the new trailer. As a lot of you, 4,000 by the way, thank you, are already aware, I made a video investigating every possible reference point we have to prove that they are the human forms of Paola from Drama CD3 and Cheatery from Madoka Magica Portable. At a first glance, while I don't think we necessarily were given anything to disprove this theory, I wouldn't say we have anything new that strengthens it either. But let's just analyze what we have and see what new information has been revealed. Firstly, we now know that the girl with green hair, who I think becomes Paola, is named Choka Shi, and that she is voiced by Shion Wakayama. And the girl with orange hair, who I believe becomes Chidori, is named Selma Therese, and she is voiced by Tomoyo Kurosawa. First of all, awesome choices for their Sayu. Among a number of great performances, I imagine most people likely know Shion Wakayama from her work in Licorice Recoil as Takina, and most recently as Momo in Dan Da Dan. And looking at Tomoyo Kurosawa, we see another absolutely stacked list of castings like Miria in Idolmaster, Itsuka in Yuki Ina as a Hero, Misaki in Bang Dream, Nobuko in JJK, and hold the phone. Did y'all see that? No freaking way. She voiced a character named Cheatery? Okay, we all agree this is an insane coincidence, right? I mean, I've been speculating since day one that Cheatery would be in this film, and obviously recently expanded the theory to try and prove that the orange-haired girl, Selma, is in fact Cheatery, and now, out of seemingly nowhere, she just so happens to get a VA who has already voiced a character with the same name. Either that's a cosmic level coincidence or the gang at Studio Shaft have been watching our speculation. Okay, jokes aside, it's obviously just a very funny coincidence, but if it's somehow intentional and Selma does turn into cheatery, this is probably the funniest piece of possible evidence we could have gotten. Anyway, let's discuss those names, starting with Choka. A quick look at the name in its original language tells us that it roughly means lilac, and since she's clearly not purple, then the lilac must be symbolic or referencing something specific to the flower. So lilacs tend to bloom in spring, and since this coincides with Easter, the flower has a spiritual link to rebirth and renewal due to Easter being the time in which Jesus rose from his grave. In Wiccan practices, lilacs also have a link to fertility due to their use in so-called love spells and cleansing rituals, as well as their apparent use to bring about, quote, intuitive dreams. This point about dreams and love is something I think we will zero in on later because I think these two are very important points of reference for figuring out the themes of this story. I don't want to touch too much on dream symbolism, but there's one point I came across which I find pretty relevant to our discussion, which is that dreaming about picking the flower can supposedly be interpreted as attempting to hold onto or preserve a memory. So, you guys have been around the block with this series. You caught the keywords there that are ringing alarm bells, I'm sure. I don't need to teach you why these parallels to lilacs are so fascinating when discussing this series. Instead, I want to ask why it is that the character named after this traditionally purple flower is associated with green. Not even her eyes are purple, so why would they name a character after this color when not a single thing about her design references it? She doesn't even reference the flower itself. She's more associated with lilies and lily pads. Now, I think green lilacs might exist, but in my opinion, the mismatch here actually seems to be deliberate. The question is still why? Well, on a standard color wheel, green is opposite to purple, so maybe Choka's name, referring to something purple despite her design reflecting its exact opposite, is a signal that she's representing the reverse of what we would normally associate with this flower. If she's the witch Paola, then we also need to keep in mind that one of the things her minions do is flip people upside down, or reverse their direction. Shout out to Kama once again for this connection, because I've not been able to stop thinking about it. Anyway, so precedence exists for her to be a character with a sort of reversing motif, and this might be one of the instances where we see it used. She is definitely a disruptive intruder, and she might be hostile specifically towards Madoka, so I would not be surprised if there's some truth to this. If lilacs represent memory preservation, then Choka, being the representative inverse of that, signifies her role is to cut through a memory that Homura wants to hold onto, and that memory is of course Madoka. But Choka is not just a character of opposites. As we see in the newest trailer, a seemingly bizarre revelation has come forward that Choka and Kyoko are going to be paired together in this film to some extent. First of all, wow, I guess Kyoko's a player, huh? First Mommy, then Sayaka, and now this girl? Damn, Kyoko, we get it. Anyway, so my first actual remark about this is that while I might have been blindsided by it at first, my friend and occasional collaborator for the channel, Evelyn, has more or less been calling this ever since I started speculating that Choka would be the witch Paula, and it all comes down to her possibly being a mirror to Kyoko. Now, this is based entirely on the speculation of her witch form being Paula, so please note that I'm obviously not presenting this as a hard fact. I believe that because she is likely going to become Paula and thus be named after a patron saint, Choka is inherently going to have a religious background. Personally, I narrowed this down to her possible real-world inspiration being a saint by the name of Santa Bona of Pisa, which also serves as the namesake for her minion, Bona. Santa Bona has ties to water, and Paula is a witch who can't swim despite living in a labyrinth entirely made of water. So my theory is that her wish in human form was to save someone from drowning. I believe it's likely that Paula's human form is going to be a religious person because of the commonality of the name Paula among saints throughout history, and the fact that Choka is paired with Kyoko actually seems to back this idea up. First is the idea of what this girl's wish was, which I speculate was to save someone from drowning. Even if this isn't her wish, there are still obviously a number of references to drowning as seen with her minions who try to drown victims who enter her labyrinth, which itself is entirely a body of water. Kyoko's death in the original show is depicted as a death by drowning. She does so with Sayaka in the ending art featured alongside episode 9's insert song And I'm Home. Also, since it's possible to dismiss the And I'm Home artwork as non-canon since it's an end card, here's an extra piece of trivia to debunk that. This same artwork appears in the second movie's depiction of the Octavia fight and flashes on screen for a few frames when Kyoko's soul gem explodes. The studio wants us to associate drowning as a motif with Kyoko. Furthermore, Kyoko's witch, Ophelia, is named after the Shakespearean character of the same name whose influential death was an accidental drowning. At first in my investigation video, I believed the drowning motif would be shared between Paula and Chitari. While this still could be the case, I missed a pretty substantial clue that could have told us to look at Kyoko earlier, which is the fact that the artwork depicting Paula's labyrinth seen in the concept movie trailer actually primarily features Kyoko facing her minions. It doesn't just stop there either, as there might be of something of note in the first trailer revealing the movie, where we saw early versions of the redesigns for Mommy, Kyoko, and Sayaka. While most of the elements of these redesigns have remained unchanged up to the recent trailers, the one outlier to this is Kyoko, who I feel looked rather off-model in this initial peek of the film. Personally, I feel like Kyoko's first redesign actually has some similarities with Choka's design, specifically with the hair, and this is something I noticed in the newest trailer when we actually got to see them side by side. Now, assuming I'm right, I wonder if Kyoko was supposed to be given a redesign that more explicitly mirrored Choka. Evelyn's observations further brought up the mention of Choka having something to do with Sayaka, but I'll come back to this when we get into an analysis of the possible themes of this film. Next up, let's move on to Selma Therese. First of all, this trailer absolutely deconfirms the idea that the R initial featured alongside the cafe is tied to this girl, because I assumed it was an initial for whatever her name was. In that case, I guess Cafe Recompense is back on the table. What's a good Madoka video without a crackpot theory? So, I jokingly brought up to Evelyn that the cursive R kinda reminds me of the real Jeanne d'Arc's handwriting. Obviously that's a stretch, but then I also realized that this same place has minions who appear to look like blue-haired humanoid maids. Just like Melissa de Vignol from Tarte Magica. It's all connected! Anyway, so Selma has a pretty fascinating name, right? I said in earlier analysis that the name evokes Mother Teresa, and if this is true, this helps add on to my theory that we should be looking at patron saints to help build the profiles of these characters. The problem is, however, Selma doesn't really seem to match what I imagined a character based on Saint Kateria would be like, assuming she does in fact become cheatery. But our process of elimination from the investigation video more or less left us with no possible candidate other than cheatery, barring the inclusion of a new character. And so many of the points we discovered there don't just magically disappear because of one discrepancy. But I don't want to just blindly ignore the discrepancies and call it a day, so we may need to reevaluate our understanding of the witch based on Selma. Firstly, Selma is an anagram of Salem, and obviously Salem has relevancy due to the Salem witch trials. The name itself appears to mean God's helmet and peaceful, which I will get into shortly. The exact origins of the name Therese do not have a clean reference point, but it likely stems from a Greek word meaning either harvest or summer. This, I'll note, offers an interesting link back to Choka, whose name translation to lilac gives her a link to spring. Let's discuss the name possibly being an anagram for Salem because there's a bit more to it than just the witch trials. Oh, also, to just add this bit on, it's not just an anagram. The root word Selma directly links to it through the name of Salim. The first thing that stands out to me as someone who believes this girl's witch to be cheatery is that there happens to be a city in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu named Salem. If you recall from our investigation, Tamil Nadu is also home to a village called Kuthankuli, which was notable because the village has a church under the patronage of Saint Kateria due to a number of miracles associated with her. So that is a pretty interesting link, but it could reasonably be a coincidence. Another interesting use of the name is the character Salem Saberhagen, the cat companion of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. This feels like an obvious link because of witches and such, but in the new trailer we actually see that along with teddy bears, what we assume is Selma's domain has links with cats, and even has a literal cat maid seen in the same location. Additionally, we know for a fact that Selma is tied to Cube more so than the other characters. It's how we theorize that she is Cheatery's human form after all. I feel this is relevant because Cube is often compared to a cat. Even further linking Selma to cats is Nagisa. While maybe not obviously cat-themed, part of Nagisa's magical girl attire is her hood, which does have what could be interpreted as cat ears in her silhouette. We already speculated a link between Selma and Nagisa in our pre-name reveal investigation, and now we have even more scenes explicitly showing them paired together. So, okay, I have to admit, even as the one who is probably championing the cheatery hype train the most, like, seriously, I've said countless times she's my most wanted addition, even I have to be skeptical because while this is a lot of evidence, a part of me can't ignore that it could just be a coincidence. But I did put a pin in something earlier, so let's return to it. If you recall, I previously said that the name Selma itself can be linked to words meaning God's helmet, as it has roots to Selig, meaning blessed, and helm or helmet. Cheatery, the witch, famously has two forms as we discussed in the prior investigation. Her disguised form has her wearing what I've been calling a mask in the image of Cube, but it is probably more accurate to compare it to a helmet as it covers her entire head and not just her face. Cheatery, and presumably her magical girl too, seem to be devoted to Cube, hence seeing him as a godlike figure. I mean, yeah, it kinda really starts to spell itself out here, and it feels harder and harder to deny that Selma is in fact cheatery. Don't let my tone fool you, I'm losing my mind, because this is honestly the exact kind of evidence I would have been looking for previously if we had it. That said, some assumptions I made about Cheatery's magical goal are thrown into question with this new evidence. I believe even more now that Selma is Cheatery, so it's time to update our actual understanding of who this character might be. So, like Choka, Selma is paired with another veteran, and as I mentioned before, that veteran is Nagisa, and gosh, it feels weird to call her a veteran. I remember when we didn't even have her name yet. We've known since Selma and Choka's reveals that Nagisa would have some type of connection with her, but at the time we believed it to be minor. Part of my speculation of Selma being cheatery relied on this logic chain. Selma is cheatery. Cheatery is named after Saint Kateria. Saint Kateria is a beheaded religious martyr. Selma hangs around Nagisa and Mami, the two characters linked by one beheading the other, so therefore Selma has a direct link to decapitation and thus another link to cheatery. In the pre-name reveal investigation, this was based on a single scene of Nagisa and Selma hanging out, and I think I even clarified that I wasn't sure how strong of a link it actually was. But now we have more scenes of them together, and the new scenes of them are... well, there's something. I feel like the Butcher's really testing me with this trailer. I skirted around this in the last analysis because I wasn't sure how to word it, but not only is this scene back, it actually seems important. So Selma and Nagisa are pole dancing together, with the former holding the latter somewhat intimately. Oh man, Shaft, what are you doing to me? You're really gonna be making me analyze the scene of the kid dancing on a pole? Okay. One thing that's pretty obvious is that there's lots of imagery in this trailer that feels weirdly intimate. We'll get to it. I swear I'm not avoiding it. But we need to focus because I finally had the chance to mention a thought I've had since releasing my investigation into the new magical girls, but forgot to put it in that video. So Chidori's eyes, the ones beneath her cube disguise, have a very distinct but not unique pattern. They consist of two upwards pointing crescents, one large one colored caramel brown, and then one slightly smaller one above it colored yellow, and then the remaining gap is closed by a black sphere. An incredibly similar pattern and gradient is seen with, you guessed it, Nagisa. It's not quite the same as the design has evolved over the years, but Chidori and Nagisa are the only two characters to share this eye design. The silhouette scene background also references this color palette. This naturally begs the question of why. During that investigation, I was going to suggest the possibility of Chidori's human form being Nagisa's older sister, and since Selma in these new trailers is pretty intimately close to Nagisa, I honestly think my theory could be onto something, and it could even be the reason why they're paired together. Now, the only blow to this idea is that Nagisa's surname is Momoe, while Selma's is Therese. But I don't know, I feel like it could still be a possibility. Maybe she's a stepsister, maybe a sister who left the family before Nagisa became a magical girl. I'm not exactly sure, but I do think there's a basis for the idea. A part of the legend of Saint Kateria involves her joint fate as a martyr with her many siblings, and her impossible birth among a set of nonuplets. It'd be weird to me if a character based on this saint didn't at least have some kind of familial story, and I think that's going to be through Nagisa. So why are they pole dancing together? Fuck if I know, man, I'm not about to debate that. So, to answer the initial question from this section, I think my conclusions from the pre-name reveal investigation have not only survived, but arguably got even stronger thanks to the pieces of visual clues we needed to tie up some loose ends. The real question now is, what on earth are these two meant to be doing in this film? Sure, Choka is close to Kyoko and Selma is close to Nagisa, but why? What's the point? Well, I do think the idea of Homura's new world actually just being an expansion of her barrier is the correct guess given the invasion of Wraiths and the existence of characters that Homura herself doesn't know. These things wouldn't make sense in a world completely controlled by Homura. That being said, it means we need to consider Selma and Choka are intruders into this labyrinth, akin to how Sayaka and Nagisa were in the last film on behalf of the Law of Cycles. I don't think they're aligned with the law of cycles, but with Cube. I've been saying this for a while that these two must be working for Cube, and the expanded labyrinth idea makes this work even better. I mean, think about it. How would Cube be able to do anything in this world if Homer is in control of it? Homer's last act was torturing Cube. She made a point of it. The last thing we see in the Rebellion story film is a Cube who looks terrified. Well, as much as an expressionless face can depict anyway. There's just no way Cube could be operating like this unless the world being under Homer's control is a lie or a misconception. It would, however, make total sense if the Nutcracker Witch's Labyrinth is just existing next to the real world, wherein Cube's main hive mind would still be unaffected. So my hypothesis on the goal of Selma and Choka remains unchanged. I do believe their goal is to create a scenario where Walpurgisnacht rises inside of the labyrinth that Homura made, and Kyubey wants this to happen so that it can reawaken the law of cycles to overpower Homura again. Wraiths could even be the medium through which Kyubey is going to harvest the despair needed to recreate a calamity on the scale of Walpurgisnacht. Their entire purpose is to absorb the cumulative negativity of humanity. Homura has access to the grief cubes that are dropped by Wraiths, meaning that some level of despair harvesting is in fact taking place. My guess is that Homura has killed a Wraith when she sensed it and is now trying to figure out where they come from. What's harder to pinpoint is why exactly Selma and Choka need to target Nagisa and Kyoko specifically. It would, in theory, make far more sense to target Sayaka instead of Kyoko, as she and Nagisa were the former allies of the Law of Cycles before Homura broke a part of the goddess away. Then again, I guess Sayaka is also off limits for them to target, as she seems, very preoccupied with Homura at the moment. Well, okay then, why Nagisa? Why not Kyoko and Mami? After all, I do think we're going to see their witch forms in this film. It makes sense to target both of them, right? And let's not forget that Mami and Kyoko have a deep history together that could easily be exploited. Well, the answer may lie in another theory presented to me by Evelyn. What if the targets aren't actually Kyoko and Nagisa, but rather Sayaka and Mami? But, for one reason or another, targeting them is impossible. Mami's a combat genius and Sayaka is wrapped around Homura's finger, so instead of trying to target them directly, Selma and Choka could be going after their closest allies. Why? Well, to deprive them, of course. Deprive them of love. Love is very obviously one of, if not the main theme for this movie. You cannot convince me otherwise, and considering observations that I learned from Karma's plot predictions, it starts to rear its messy head around every corner you turn. First, let's establish the baseline. The Clara dolls are the minions of the Nutcracker Witch, Homelily. They each represent a different kind of emotion, and while there are meant to be 15 dolls, there are only 14 accounted for in the Rebellion story. The 15th doll, the one they are all waiting for, is Love, also named I. We can be sure that this is meant to be Homura and that it's quote-unquote missing because Homura won't let go of her love for Madoka. So whether or not that observation is literally true, the fact remains that Homura's conflict from the Rebellion story is a result of her repressing her emotions, but mostly repressing her love. And now that we have seen Akuma Homura state that her actions and her very form are driven by love, it signifies that she's embraced it as a part of her new or expanded world. Now in this most recent trailer, we see scenes that honestly cannot be described as anything but intimate, which genuinely feels like it's a result of what we just spoke about. Well, at least to me. There's the lip-pulling scene between Madoka and the dummy Homura, there's whatever the hell Homura is doing to Sayaka in the alleyway, there's the heart-shaped spotlights pairing Choka and Selma to Kyoko and Nagisa. Oh, hey, now I can go back and finish my prior point of speculation. So, as I was gonna say before, Choka and Selma may be targeting Kyoko and Nagisa to deprive Sayaka and Mami of their sources of love. We saw what happened to Homura when she was cut off from her source of love. She became the Nutcracker Witch inside of her labyrinth and became so warped by despair that she considered even that feeling to be dear to her. More importantly, so did Kyubey. Kyubey's goal was to observe what would happen to Homura if she was cut off from the Law of Cycles, and now they know exactly what happens. It could very well be that a deprivation of love causes an imbalance and triggers the collapse into despair, and multiple people falling to their own despair at once would most certainly be expected to make a new Walpurgisnacht. Now, I'm trying to find a source for who translated this, but I made a really interesting and coincidental discovery in regards to this idea that links back to the concept movie. This shot gives us a glimpse at the very first take on Sayaka's redesign and has posters written in witch runes. Those runes, decoded to Japanese and then translated to English, supposedly read as follows. Forever under the principle, law of magic, this person's freedom and love will be deprived. If this translation is accurate, then it not only backs up the idea I presented, But it also leads perfectly to my next point. And yep, now it's time to talk about the Homura and Sayaka alleyway scene. Like, okay, there's no getting around this. I said it in the recap section, this really feels like a scene that'd play either before or after the two characters have kissed. I think this Homura must be the real one, Akuma Homura, just because we've already had her paired with Sayaka since the Rebellion story. Even there, the pair did have somewhat of an intimate scene in the ending of the film, so I wonder if they're really leaning into that dynamic more for the actual follow up. Personally, I've landed on this. I think Akuma Homura using love means she is weaponizing it against Sayaka as a form of control, which itself makes sense to me if we consider the possibility of Selma's and Choka's plan involving the deprivation of love from Mami and Sayaka. If we ask why Sayaka, well, the answer lines up somewhat similarly as before. Mami is probably too strong to be fought directly, Homura probably isn't going to willingly hurt Madoka in such a direct way, and Kyoko and Nagisa seem preoccupied. Plus, Homura and Sayaka of course have their shared history. I wonder if it's possible that Homura is trying to prevent Sayaka from becoming a witch again by forcibly attempting to balance her emotions. The witching out may in fact be a result of what Selma and Choka are doing after all, which would go against my original idea of it being caused by Homura. In fact, why not? Let's add this. What if Homura is the one who bandaged Sayaka and this alleyway scene is actually a part of it, showing us the origin of Sayaka being patched up, so to speak? I don't think I have a lot more to say about this, so I'll leave it there for open discussion. Now, something that bugged me enough to bring it up to my friend Evelyn while scripting this part was the seemingly sudden use of cat imagery in relation to Selma. Cats have been an important part of the franchise since the very beginning. We know this from the then unnamed appearance of Amy in the opening credits of the anime, then, of course, the backstory of Madoka's wish being to save Amy in the first drama CD. Following this was Nagisa's somewhat cat like appearance in the Rebellion film with her hood, a cat being mentioned in the Cake song, cats referenced in the concept movie trailer, and now the cat imagery seen here in Walpurgisnacht Rising. Let's zero in on a couple of these because I think they're pointing towards something that may be very important. Point 1, the Cake song. In the Cake song performed in the Rebellion story, there's a line at the end of the song which has always stood out to me. This will be on screen now. The Cake song is working as an homage to traditional magical girl shows, as is a majority of the opening of the Rebellion story, but it's also a tool to foreshadow the true nature of the Nutcracker Witch's labyrinth with the line about the so-called bitter dream. The bitter dream, I think, refers to the fact that the world in Rebellion is entirely self-contained inside of a labyrinth, and so the quote-unquote kitty's dream is therefore Homer's, as she is the cause of its existence, and the bitterness comes from the growing despair that the law of cycles is unable to cleanse. The thing I find weird, however, is that this reading implies Homer to be linked with cats, which is something I didn't really see much of, not even before her transformation into Akuma Homura, who is now associated with lizards and maybe dragons. There is the idea that the kitty's dream is actually referring to Cube exerting influence inside of the labyrinth and observing it from the outside, but the way it's worded between dubs is actually a little different, and thus our understanding of its significance is too. This translates to less of a question and answer, but two direct statements. First is the declaration that the dream is bitter, and next, the declaration that atop the plate is the dream of a cat. Technically, it still works the same way as we understand it in the dub, but here it appears to read closer to the idea that the bitter dream and the kitty's dream are not one and the same, something that's not as clear in the wording of the dub. But consider the following. Dream could also mean wish, and so the only person who quote unquote had the dream of a cat, so to speak, was Madoka. While on the topic of Madoka and dreaming, her line in the song about being the melon in the cake has her mention that splitting it open would bring sweet dreams. The end of the rebellion story, of course, has the law of cycles become split in two. So I believe that the Kitty's dream line is meant to be a reference to the idea of Homura and Madoka's wishes clashing. The dream is becoming bitter because another dream is colliding with the original one. Further proving that this sequence is all about foreshadowing the climax, it must be understood that the Cake Song is a nursery rhyme game where the goal appears to be to add a detail to whatever the initial statement is before passing it on until it reaches the last player, who then has to say something with the qualities of each prior statement. To explain it better, look at this evolution of the cake in the song. Bebe declares that the cake is round, then passes it to Sayaka. Sayaka says an ingredient in the cake is a raspberry, then passes it to Kyoko, saying one of the ingredients is red. Kyoko says her ingredient is an apple, which is round and red, and then adds that the cake has something Bebe likes before passing it to Mami. Mami says cheese is her ingredient, which is Bebe's favorite food, and then she passes it to Homura with the added detail being that the cake has something tumbling or turning. Homura picks the pumpkin, which is full of seeds, but for declaring that the ingredient is sweet and passes it to Madoka. Madoka then says that the last ingredient is the melon, which is round, sweet, apparently something Bebe likes, full of seeds, and red on the inside. This pretty much is what I think the Nutcracker Witch's Labyrinth is, a consolidation of various things from Homer's subconscious built into one giant metaphorical cake. Imagery in the final battle against the Nutcracker Witch also supports that the cake is a reference to the labyrinth, as the background has these rainbow layers, which could be interpreted as cake layers. So why the heck am I bringing up the freaking cake song in the Big 26? I know it seems like we've derailed from the cat imagery, but we're getting back there. Remember, the cake song is about a dream turning bitter and needing to be fixed and made sweet again. This obviously refers to the plot of the Rebellion story, but let me also direct your attention to the very first trailer for Walpurgisnacht Rising. The tagline was, "And so, let the curtain rise on tonight's dream," implying and reinforcing what I've been saying from earlier. The dream, Homer's labyrinth, is still active and is in the process of being torn down. Madoka's input in the cake song is that the melon brings sweet dreams when split open. Again, this was foreshadowing for the end of the Rebellion story. However, while we may have seen the splitting of the melon, Madoka, we are yet to see the sweet dreams that said splitting is supposed to bring. Well, I think it becomes clear that the sweet dream is going to be what we see in Walpurgisnacht Rising. Once more, I need to thank Evelyn for bringing this up, but if we can consider the cat imagery to be related to Madoka, then give a moment to think about the age-old idiom, curiosity killed the cat, satisfaction brought it back. Curiosity, of course, refers to the inherent nature of Kyubei's contract. Lure in the girls with a miracle that takes their soul in exchange to fulfill it. Their curiosity kills them the moment they accept the contract. This applies even more to Madoka, who completely lost her human identity to become the law of cycles. Satisfaction brought it back, in this case, refers to Homer's own desire, her love, bringing Madoka back out of the law of cycles. To return to the Kitty's dream line from the song, I think I've settled on this interpretation for it. There exists a dream, Homura's, which is turning bitter because there is another dream, the Kitty's/Madoka's dream, clashing with it. Madoka's is the sweet dream, but Madoka herself isn't from inside of Homura's labyrinth, and so she is an intruder to the world inside her soul gem. Thus, the clash becomes clear and feeds back to the earlier point about the labyrinth expanding rather than Homura resetting everything like Madoka did. Homura's dream, aka the Labyrinth of the Nutcracker Witch, is clashing with Madoka's dream, aka the real world. It's also a possible reference to the inherent conflict that comes from comparing Madoka and Homura's wishes, or their dreams. Point 2. The concept movie. So, Cats in relation to the concept movie trailer stands out to me because of what the context is surrounding them. There are a couple of still unknown speakers in the trailer who have a short back and forth about cats, stating, quote, "Lately there's been a lot of cats around, huh? Yeah, they're mixed in with dead cats, slash, I hear there are dead cats walking among them. How can you tell they're dead, slash, how do you tell the dead cats from the rest?" Understandably, I think a lot of people thought about Cube when these two speakers brought up cats because of the fact that we see many copies of Cube and just as many copies of it being killed. But let's consider this with the context of the cake song potentially framing Madoka as the kitty whose dream is disrupting Homura. The fact that the speakers say there are a lot of cats and that there are dead ones mixed in with them may be a reference to the fact that Madoka's memories from all of Homer's resets converge when she became the Law of Cycles. Naturally, many versions of Madoka exist, so to speak, and of those, many died. Multiple timelines probably aren't going to be converging in this film, so I think if this relates to Madoka, it could actually be referring to something to do with the Wraiths. As a refresher, Wraith Madoka is a type of wraith who took on her form based on Homer's powers and memories. Mutant wraiths can perfectly blend in among people who knew the original victim, but are spotted immediately as wraiths by anyone unfamiliar with that person. If we read dead as this type of mutant wraith identity theft, then I think this exchange starts to make more sense, because Speaker B would be someone who recognizes the discrepancy because they don't know the original person, but Speaker A can't recognize it because they are familiar with the original. I think we should be thinking of Madoka whenever cats are referred to for the reasons we've already laid out. If we do, this line in the concept movie gains extra context when paired with the imagery in the trailers for Walpurgisnacht Rising. Notably are the scenes of Madoka surrounded by a crowd of her own duplicated and distorted self, and the newest trailer's scenes showing wraiths overlaid with Madoka's left eye. What does this specifically mean? Well, I'm not really sure. I already think the Wraiths are coming for Madoka specifically, which may indicate we see multiple mutant Wraiths adopting Madoka's form, which would align with the lots of cats mentioned in the concept movie trailer. Not really confident in suggesting what this would mean for the film, but I think there's some merit to this interpretation. So how the hell does any of this relate to Selma? Okay, so I had to cut in on my initial coverage of Selma earlier, which means I didn't have a spot to say this, but I think this trailer almost 100% confirms that she is cheatery like I've been speculating, and it's all thanks to the cats. If you recall from my pre-name reveal investigation, I stated that I believed cheatery shares a number of similarities to Madoka and Kriemhild Gretchen. At the time, I pointed out that the similarities were the nature of their wishes being self-sacrificial, a potential color mismatch between their human and witch forms, their witches having no known labyrinths, and a persistent goal that they are still fighting towards in their witch forms. While making that video, I didn't want to really extrapolate too much more than that. I just thought it was interesting and maybe why cheatery would be considered for the film. But as it turns out, Selma gives us one more solid piece of evidence implying a connection, and a second possible new interpretation to discuss. Let's cover the obvious first. Selma has a number of sudden connections to cats, which now helps paint her as a potential mirror to Madoka due to her connection to cats. Upon further analysis of both this girl and cheatery with the idea of cats in mind, some potential design references I missed may be inferred. First, we could interpret the silhouette of Selma to have cat ears based on how her pigtails form this peak atop her head. Additionally, the needles in her pigtails may be interpreted as the whiskers of a cat. Adding to this, while it might be a stretch, you can roughly compare the silhouettes of Selma and Cube to see a couple of key similarities. They both have the triangular peaks atop their head, and both have longer extensions that frame the face. Take this comparison with a grain of salt because it may not be intentional. The next one might not be a stretch depending on your take on her possible name inspirations, and to be honest, I should have taken notice of this one during my pre-name reveal investigations, because even without the name Selma or the link to Salem, we could have identified it much earlier. So, with the knowledge that the name Selma has etymological links to the name Salem, it's possible that a potential inspiration behind her name is Salem Saberhagen, the cat familiar of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and by breaking down that name, we get Hagen, which is a name of Germanic and Old Norse origin meaning hedge or enclosure, but the name meaning itself isn't what I found so fascinating. Hagen is a figure of importance in Norse literature, particularly in the poem Nibelungenlied, where he is a villainous warrior responsible for the death of the legendary hero Siegfried. And what's so special about Siegfried? Well, it's that he had a wife named Kriemhild, who may have served as partial inspiration behind the name of Madoka's witch form. Anyway, that alone means nothing. Where it gets interesting is that Kriemhild, sometime after learning of her husband's death, confronts and kills Hagen. And how does she kill him? By beheading him with her late husband's sword. So let me lay this out. Selma is highly likely the magical girl who becomes Cheatery, whose name is inspired by a saint who is famous for being a beheaded martyr. Coincidentally, Selma just so happens to share a potential etymological link to a character beheaded by the namesake of Madoka's witch form. Two completely different sources of potential inspiration point towards the act of beheading, and it's at that point I felt it couldn't just be a coincidence. At the risk of looking stupid later, I feel that there's just no way Selma isn't cheatery. I was doing some extra research after the fact with this section of scripting and came across something that's mostly mildly amusing to me, but I wanted to spotlight it anyway. So, Chatery does in fact have a bushy tail in her witch design that could be interpreted as a cat's tail. With this in mind, I wanted to take a look at known cat breeds that have bushy, fluffy tails. My research led me to a breed of cat called the Nebelung, which was not only named after the Nibelung, but the modern variation of the breed, originating from the 80s, can be traced to two cats named Siegfried and Brunhild. I don't think this is particularly relevant or important, but it sure is a hell of a coincidence to have found this now of all times. So, assuming that a good chunk of this is right, and Selma is cheatery and they are meant to be mirrors of Madoka and Kriemhild Gretchen in some way, what does this mean for the film? Well, part of my older speculation was revolving around the idea of Paula, or in this case Choka, being in the middle of some kind of potential betrayal. Actually, while I'm talking about her, let's go back to the point I left off earlier about the potential plot significance regarding Choka and Sayaka that was brought to my attention by my friend Evelyn. Sayaka has a very rocky history when it comes to romance in this series. Most famously, she goes on a destructive, downwards mental spiral when her sense of self blurs enough to make her feel like she doesn't deserve to tell her crush, Kyosuke, that she likes him. Her inaction lets Hitomi start dating him instead. So, part of the rebellion story established a budding friendship between Kyoko and Sayaka, possibly partially as a result of their pairing becoming popular online. I think most of us went into this film's hype cycle expecting that while Homura would obviously be keeping Sayaka close by, the implied romance between Kyoko and Sayaka would be getting a decent focus to follow up on what was established in the rebellion story. Enter Choka, who seems to have fairly effortlessly swooped in to steal Kyoko away from Sayaka. How does Sayaka let her love interest get taken by a girl with green hair twice now? Come on, Sayaka, you're better than that. Alright, joking aside, I think this is probably very significant, but I can't quite place why other than what I already pointed out earlier with what I now think is Selma and Choka's quote-unquote love deprivation plan. I can, however, stake my claim that the boldest prediction from my pre-name reveal investigation video isn't so far-fetched after all, as the details in this trailer have led me to believe that my call on Paolo's human form being partly inspired by Dante's Inferno might be true. The TLDR recap on that is that a man named Paolo Malatesta entered an illicit relationship with his brother Giovanni's wife, Francesca, and both he and Francesca were killed by Giovanni stabbing them to death. They would both end up in the second circle of hell, representative of lust. At the time, I ended my idea by saying that it would only be relevant if Paula, and in this case Choka, were involved in a betrayal and that it would most definitely not involve anything to do with a romantic pairing, especially not to the extent seen in Inferno. However, it seems that I might have been underselling it, because that appears to pretty much be exactly what is happening here, minus the whole sibling-in-law thing from Inferno. Choka is with Kyoko, they seem pretty closely connected, and Kyoko is now not with Sayaka. Considering Paolo Malatesta met his end by being stabbed, it is shockingly fitting that it is Sayaka whose partner, ally, friend, whatever, is being taken away from her as she is a sword wielder. A key detail here is that Giovanni Malatesta killed both the people who betrayed him, his wife and his brother. There's a shot in one of the trailers which appears to show Kyoko face down while Nagisa looks scared at something off screen. Could it be that Sayaka is the cause of whatever happened to Kyoko in this scene? I don't have much more to add to this, but I do strongly feel that my proposal of Dante's Inferno serving as a reference point might have genuinely be proven right, which is just absolutely insane because we had nothing to really connect it back then, and I wasn't fully sure of including it. Considering this even further, one more comparison and potential link we can make between Sayaka and Giovanni is about their looks. In Inferno, Giovanni is described as deformed, and in real life, he was given the unfortunate title of Giovanni the Lame, which referred to limping or other such medical deformities. Part of Sayaka's insecurity is that she feels herself to no longer be human enough for Kyosuke to love her the way she wants, and in Portable this is exacerbated when her deformed appearance terrifies him. Add on that Sayaka's new appearance shows her heavily bandaged, and the potential link to Giovanni through body image and personal health becomes pretty clear. Also, Sayaka is a character who is pretty much designed to always be in a place of suffering in this series. Um, I feel like there was an interview somewhere with Gen Urobuchi where he alluded to something like that, but I can't find it right now. But yeah, given that, something like what we've been describing here just feels way too on brand for Sayaka for them not to do. At the risk of stroking my ego too much, I feel incredibly vindicated by seeing even more evidence working in favor of my ideas regarding Selma and Choka. It means that we were on the right track and that the methods we used can in fact do the job we laid out in that video pretty well. Okay, victory lap over, let's get back on track. With more evidence pointing towards Selma having some form of narrative similarity to Madoka, does the same apply to Choka in regards to Homura? While Choka does appear as a disruptive entity, kind of like Homura does in the original show, but the same is also true of Selma. Both Homura and Choka wear glasses, their main color motifs oppose each other, and in one way or another, both seem to be interested in Madoka. Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't think I personally have enough to fully determine my thoughts on that with the same level of confidence I have for Selma's possible role, so I'll instead just leave this up to community speculation. One thing I will add on regarding Selma is that the story of the Nibelungen lead has Hagen kill Siegfried, the lover of Kriemhild, who later kills Hagen and is then killed herself. It's a messy story about revenge driven by love. Given that we are speculating Selma and Choka are antagonists and trying to help Kyubey create a new Walpurgisnacht, I wonder if there's a potential link here. Something like Selma's actions are going to put Homura in harm's way, and that is what makes Madoka retaliate upon reawakening her powers. Okay, so there's an elephant in the room I have not been touching for quite some time, and I think we are long overdue to properly address it. We really need to take another look at the discussion surrounding the different versions of Homura in this trailer and in the movie in general, because I think I now have a clearer picture of what's going on. I have to admit, when I first started covering Madoka Magica alongside the release of Walpurgisnacht Rising information, my research methods and knowledge were, well, more lacking than I claimed. In recent times, I have strived to do more and better research to present better realized arguments and ideas, but one such point of contention comes from Homura herself, moreover the appearances of Homura in these trailers. While I did make the correct claim of multiple versions of Homura being a thing, the way in which I thought this was presented has changed a lot from surface level reading to what I think is a more grounded and fitting one. For good measure, let's discuss what the general claim of the dummy Homura theory is one more time. Since the first look at the movie dropped, we were shown at the very least three distinct versions of Homura. One with a purple dress and phone, one with a black dress, purple hair and a parasol, and Akuma Homura. Since then, we can confirm at least one other Homura being the one holding the Dume Venus mirror, who also has a brown headband. There seems to be an idea that this could be a second version of Akuma Homura in this movie, but this is a point I don't fully agree with. The prevailing theory to explain this from what I saw was the dummy Homura theory. I'm not exactly sure who started it, but the premise was that Homalily's minions, the Claridolls, had begun to take on Homura's form. In my solo research, I first pointed out my realization of this when comparing the headband of the parasol holding Homura to Nekoda, the Claridol also known as Gloominess. For the record, I don't believe this anymore because the headband doesn't perfectly match. This logic tracks, as familiars are supposed to be able to mutate into witches if left to absorb enough despair. I don't recall off the top of my head if we have seen this in the series, but I can't imagine that it's not true. The only messy spot with this is that we're assuming that dolls turn into copies of Homer when, in accordance with the known law, they would be expected to turn into copies of Homer Lily specifically, but I still feel the basis of the theory is pretty solid. Since then, dummy Homura theory has been in a bit of a nebulous spot because while I do think there's truth to it, we can't seem to perfectly match the other Clara dolls to the other versions of Homura. The only one I can seem to make a link between with any logic to it is the brown headbanded Homura who looks at herself in a mirror with Dume Venus engraved around the glass. In the trailer, this scene match cuts with a scene of Ibari, the Claridol known as Pride, looking through a magnifying glass, signifying a potential link between the pair. Thanks to both Karma's video and some other community members' posts that I read, I finally came to realize that I missed a pretty glaring piece of possible evidence in the form of production notes originating from the concept movie trailer, which points to the speculated existence of a character codenamed Wasu. Wasu is a character we only know by name from blurry stills of notes that were shown in the concept movie trailer. Over the years, multiple attempts at unblurring the stills were given, and the current accepted version mentions the following points. The movie at the time of production was focused on three characters, Madoka, Homura, and Wasu. There were sides for each character, which has been interpreted to mean that they were each character's arc, like Homura's side/arc. Example dialogue shows Wasu and Madoka interacting, with Madoka asking Wasu the following question: Homura, did you cut your hair? Which implies Wasu looks like Homura. As an aside, before I continue, since they were explicitly called character sides in the notes, and one of the trailers for the new film is called Side Homura, I have a feeling that an upcoming trailer, maybe even the next one, will be called Side Madoka. With this knowledge in mind, looking at the trailers so far points to only one possible candidate being Wasu if this character still exists, and it's the Homer with red eyes, purple hair, and a parasol. The instances of this Homura in the trailers thus far have only shown her interacting with Madoka. There's the dance scene, there's the scene with Madoka seeing her on her way to school, and most recently there's the lip pulling scene where Homura does so to Madoka. Additionally, in both the dancing and the schoolwalk scenes, Madoka is shown expressing a level of confusion at the sight of Homura. At the time, I chalked this up to it just being that Madoka can tell something is off because this Homura is a transformed Claridol, which still holds true for this theory. In fact, we can now strengthen our old speculation using this point about Wasu. In my last trailer analysis, I said that Homura's red eyes imply she might be one side of Homura's emotional extreme, representing her burning passion or love. Given the theme of intimacy present in this trailer, I actually think I was orbiting a pretty sound point here. But if that's true and this girl represents passion or love, then what if she's the missing 15th Claridol, I? Of course, there is also the interpretation that the last doll was Homura herself, but since she seems to have embraced love to a far greater degree now, and other parts of her psyche appear to be fracturing from her, what's to say this didn't cause I to take her own form? Let's be real, Wasu probably was never going to be a real name. It immediately reads as a code name. In fact, we think the name Margaret appears in these same notes, which is also identified as a possible code name for cream-held Gretchen. Wasu might have roots to the word wasure, which broadly means forgetfulness, but it might have also been derived from the romanization of Walpurgisnacht's name when written in Japanese, Warupurgisu. This is important because in the newest trailer, this version of Homura opens up her parasol and we see a view of it from above. As you can see, it bears an undeniable design similarity to that of Walpurgisnacht, leading to the idea that this Homura is potentially going to become the stage-constructing witch. The problem is that I'm just not entirely sure where this line of speculation goes from here. I wanted to get another thought on this because it was bugging me, so I spoke about this idea briefly with fellow Madoka analyst Clear and Sweet. After sharing their input, we more or less ended on the same general idea that while the film depicting Homura's fractured psyche with many bodies seems plausible and makes for a compelling storytelling mechanic, if it's true and this girl is then the logical jump to suggest she somehow becomes Walpurgisnacht is simply too great to make. Oh, also, Clear and Sweet added that in Japan, Walpurgisnacht's name does in fact tend to be shortened to Wasu as an abbreviation, so the idea of Wasu having something to do with the witch isn't completely far-fetched. In terms of calling a definitive stance on her identity, I'm not sure I'm willing to do that here. I think we have a much better understanding of these characters now, but their roles still seem a little ambiguous, at least to me, and I'm willing to admit that shortcoming instead of forcing a theory I'm not confident in. I might as well throw this in too. It is possible that this girl could be a mutant wraith, but I feel like that's just not the case here. I think now the most likely guess is that she is Wasu or I. Honestly, I'm somewhat tempted to do a full dedicated video to Wasu in the future since we have enough time before August, and there's a lot more to this character than what I can cover here. What I might do alongside a full video dedicated to her is kickstart a new investigation into the blood stills because, as far as I can tell, we still don't have the full version translated yet, but I'll only do that depending on the interest in such a topic. Before we wrap it up, let's go ahead and bring back up the lip pulling scene that we debated earlier. With the probability of this character being Wasu or I think the lip pull genuinely is meant to be intimate. It'd make sense if this is who I believe it to be, because I, and therefore possibly Wasu, would most certainly be going after Madoka, the person who is the source of Homura's missing love. This also seems to make the similar lip-pulling scene in the side Homura trailer make sense because of another note we can make in relation to the production stills. Madoka and Wasu appear to grow close in the outline of the film, but Homura seems to have a hatred for Wasu. I think the atmosphere in the scene with the unknown figure pulling Homura's lip feels more hostile than the one with the parasol Homura and Madoka, which would support the Wasu-I theory. The only thing I can't explain with that scene and will need input on is who is actually doing it and why. The Homura having her lip pulled is the brown headbanded Homura who may be Ibari the Clarador. I'm not really sure where else to put this, so I'll just tack it on to the end. The Homura I believe to be I appears in this setting, which I think is meant to be a visual representation of the so-called Silver Garden mentioned in the credits song performed by Calafina for the Rebellion story. There almost certainly is some significance to this visual because of Kajiura's storytelling with her music and lyrics. A quick reading of Kimi no Gi no Niwa tells us that it's about the preservation of something, maybe a memory, a specific time, and it's especially evocative with lines talking about how the gateway to adulthood is shut off. There's a guardian watching over someone who's described as childlike, sleeping, and there's a lot of other youthful or, I don't know, gentle descriptions. Given that it begins with a music box as its intro, I also think the song was meant to be telling us something about the next film due to the concept movie having imagery specifically associated with Madoka and ballet. And typically, a miniature ballerina figure is what one would figure when picturing a music box. For the longest time, my take on this is that, like a ballerina in a music box, Madoka is being preserved in what Homura perceives as her best state, the version of Madoka that she grew attached to. I wonder if that attachment is seen specifically with this Homura who I believe to be I. Not fully sure on this, I could go into a bigger investigation on this, but the script is already nearing 16,000 words, so I think we should just wrap up this video here and leave that for future discussion. So I think this just about covers everything that I wanted to share in terms of my thoughts on that trailer and the biggest observations currently on my mind right now. This is probably the best look at the film we have so far, and to be honest, I genuinely think it does have enough for us to potentially very accurately predict the plot. Also, I think this is just a really good trailer in general. It looks fantastic, and I think we can see so much improvement in the months since our last look at it. Anyway, I want to give a quick recap of the major points that I'm standing by for this film. Number 1. Choka and Selma are the human forms of Paula and Cheatery and are agents of Cube, whose goal is to set off a chain reaction of emotional collapse to create a new Walpurgisnacht. Number 2. Selma, and by extension Cheatery, are narrative echoes to Madoka and Cream-Hilled Gretchen in some way. Number 3. The ending of the Rebellion story shows Homura's labyrinth overlapping with the real world rather than Homura creating a new universe like I previously assumed. Number 4. The dummy Homura theory still has legs and explains the many versions of her in the trailers as evolved Claridolls. Number 5. One Homura in particular is I, who I believe was internally called Wasu during prediction and may have some link to Walpurgisnacht. And number 6. Wraith Madoka is in this film and is causing Madoka's own fall to despair by draining her emotions and taking her place. Talking about my own role in Walpurgisnacht Rising theorizing, it's been a fascinating journey so far to say the least. Back in the day when the announcement dropped, I was in a very different headspace when it came to my opinions on the franchise as a whole, but as time has gone on, my own beliefs and views have had to update in response to what this movie has shown us. I think it's good. I've been able to challenge myself and refine my approach to theorizing and analysis, so expect to see lesser of those low-quality Lore of Cycles as Walpurgisnacht videos, and more of the investigation-style videos like I released prior to this one moving forward. None of this would be possible without the whole community working together and making their own observations, so naturally a huge thank you to the channels and users who have been working on their own theories and analyses that have helped further push my own understanding of the film and allowed me to craft my take on it. Directly, I'd like to thank Clear and Sweet for taking a look at my notes regarding Wasu and I and for giving their input on the whole idea. As I keep saying, they're a great channel, so if you're somehow watching me and not also watching their videos, you gotta go fix that. And of course, also a special thanks to my biggest contributor in the script for this video in particular, my friend Evelyn, who helped me to synthesize several of my loose observations, especially regarding Selma and Choka, into solid points that were included in the final version of the script. So, what comes next? Well, at this point I'm not entirely sure. I was considering doing a part 2 to my The Different Story manga review, but I haven't had personal interest in continuing it just yet, but it's not off the table. That said, I believe a video investigating Wasu is probably in the works as my highest priority project. A video like that will undoubtedly take a lot of work, however, so don't expect it anytime soon. For now, I'll just leave this video here and pass the discussion along to you guys. Be sure to let me know what you think about the new trailer, my observations and theories, and what your own predictions are now that we have a much clearer look at this film. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I see you.